Hi there, this is Bob Menzies coming to you from Vancouver Island with another episode of the Songwriter Life. Thanks for watching. Now, in this video, I want to share with you how I made my first album. And hopefully you can see how you might make your dream into a reality or help you out in thinking about how something like this might come to pass for you. I also hope I have some time to share with you how I wrote my first song for that first album. It was called Hey Now Joe. The album was called Breaking Time. In any case, if we have not met before, my name is Bob Menzies. I'm a singer-songwriter. Writing songs is my passion. It's what I get out of bed in the morning to do. I love to do it. I do perform. I have performed at festivals and charity events these days, or here and there. I'm a solo performer, but really what I love to do is write songs, and I also love to be in the studio, and I'll tell you a little bit about why that is as we go on with this. One of the things that I'd like you to encourage you to do is hit that like button and say, or let me know that you're on, that you're watching and where you're watching from. And in fact, maybe I can try to share that right now, although I'm not too sure how I would do that, but in any case, oh, wait a minute, here it is, I think. Is that it? No. Anyway, let's talk about it a little bit. I mean, how do you go about making an album? Because, a lot of people ask me, well, it seems like a very complicated process and a tough thing to do and so on, especially when you're a DIY and you're just, you're your own person and trying to do it. Well, I'd come back to singing and songwriting after a long time off. That story about raising a family and having a life, avoiding being a starving artist until you came back to it. And it's always been my dream to explore the creative life on a kind of full-time basis, which is what I do right now. So I had a bunch of songs. I wrote them, and I wanted to, have an outlet for them. So I started to look around for, now I was still working at the time, downtown Toronto. And so I Googled some studios, and I found a studio in East York that had won a Grammy, or not a Grammy, but a Juno, or been nominated for Juno in blues and folk music, my kind of music. So I thought, I'll give them a call. So I did. I gave turned out there to be a new owner of the studio, and he was a little more rock oriented, which turned out to be fine. His name was Mark Nakamura. And we worked out a deal. One thing when you go to a studio, I didn't want to go to, a home studio, really. I wanted it to be a real studio, but by the same token, I knew I didn't want to go to a big studio because obviously I didn't have the budget for it, and I wanted to have more, as much input into the whole process as I could. So we did work out something, and I needed to work out a bit of a schedule. So we worked out that it would probably take a total of something like 10 days in total just to work within this budget that I had. So then I went to my boss, and I told him, look, I need some time off. And I had some vacation, so I knew I could use some of that time to sort of do some prep work and pre-production, if you like. And but also I wanted to decided to do it. Well, he decided, so I can't let you go right now. It's a really busy time, and I need you here. And I didn't tell him why. I was still on the down low about it. I was a little shy about it, if you wanted to know the truth. And I didn't know if it would come off, so all of those things. And I was so conflicted that I used to ride in the elevator in these downtown high-rise I worked in, and I'd have a harmonica in my pocket, and I'd pull it out and blow a few notes before I got to my floor, and then I'd put it away and put on my corporate face. In any case, we decided that I could take every Friday off for a period of time, and then kind of roll that into next year's vacation or something like that. So that's what we did. So that was the first thing. I had to organize some time to be able to do it, some time to make sure I was prepared properly, and find a place to do it. So in our first session, oh, hi, Mark. Nice to have you join me. Appreciate it. So we go into the studio, and one of the first things we had to kind of organize was to do some demo tapes. Now, nowadays, I tend to do my own demo tapes in my home studio. Nothing elaborate. It doesn't take a lot. Your demo tapes really are going to show the session players and the producer and that sort of thing, the bare bones of the song. And actually, most of the time I've got them because I'm a singer-songwriter and a folk singer. So just the guitar and the voice is enough to really get the idea of the song. And in fact, now I'm more recording on that basis anyway. And Mark convinced me that I should use session musicians. And he said, look, if you use session guys or girls, they'll just bring your music to another level because they really can understand what you're doing and they can really bring a lot to it. So at the time, I really wasn't, too much aware of how that might work. So I went with it in any case. So the first thing I did was, after establishing the timeline and how we would kind of do this, and I also worked within wanted to work within a budget, and I had to work out how to pay these guys. Because typically what happens is the owner or manager or operator of the studio will often act as a producer and an engineer, or he has, in this case, we had a separate engineer. And that part of it is one part of your budget. The other part of the budget is paying the studio musicians. Typically, you will pay them directly. Now, it varies all over, but, typically, and it's still about the same, session people are looking for about $100 a song. In Nashville, they work in 3-hour increments, and it might cost you something anywhere between $500 to $1,000 for one of those sessions per person. And it's always negotiable, but my feeling has always been, look, I don't only have a limited amount of money because I knew I wanted to make more than one album. I knew I was going to make more, and I couldn't blow it all on one. And besides that, chances of recouping the money were pretty limited. So I wanted to make sure that I was fair to them as well because they're working musicians. So we worked it out, and it worked out fine. I think everybody was pretty happy. In fact, I got to tell you, it turns out I was overwhelmed by it because what I did was I prepared my own charts, and the kind of charts that have your song written out. I don't know if I have any around here, but the song is kind of written out, and you have I'll just take a look at this here. Just pull something out, but it might look something like this, where you have the lyrics and the chords on top of it, typical way. And I sent them a CD with the songs, and also with the lyrics and the chords. And they made up their own charts. Now I was into that world of charts where every musician kind of uses their own charts. That was another thing altogether. But what happened when we finally came to the day of the tracking session was they brought their own charts with them. And I was quite amazed about how much they had done. I was really lucky to have a fellow named Russell Gray act as a kind of musical director on the first one. And on my second album, he was the producer. He was the producer on it. And so he had a lot of ideas for each song. And one of the things he brought to the table, and I found typically they do that, is that, different intros for different songs to try to change it up so it wasn't all the same. And I got to tell you, and in subsequent albums that I've made, and in Nashville, it's a little bit of a different story, but they bring the same level of it. I mean, they are making a product, an artistic product, and they really want it to be good. So I was, really extremely impressed by that, and I've never been disappointed. In fact, I've always been kind of overwhelmed. So in any case, the first thing you kind of need to do is come to a tracking session. So that usually, in my experience, we've done that always in one day. So our tracking session turned out to be a 12-hour session. So we got in this, and that was brutal to be there that early in the morning. And typically what you're doing is you're singing what they call a scratch track along with the musicians. So typically in a tracking session, you might have guitar, bass, and drums to set up the rhythm section. Later on, you'll do overdubbing, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. So one of the first songs, just for curiosity's sake, the first song that I had written in this time of coming to songwriting was a song called Hey Now Joe. Now, this song really came about because I had a neighbor who lived across the street from me, a retired guy, and we struck up a bit of a friendship. And I was renovating an old house and across the street from him, and he taught me stuff about drywall and how to swing a sledgehammer and all that sort of thing, which I was not adept at doing that. I was an office working kind of guy. And but then he passed. I remember being in the funeral home just before the service, and he was off on the side, or not on the side, but in a room where he was in a gurney kind of a thing, and it was just him. But they hadn't done any, hadn't put him in the coffin or anything by then. So I remember just kind of looking at him and saying, Joe, where have you gone? And I was kind of like this. Hey now, Joe, where do you go after the sun goes down? Are you looking for light in the dark of the night after the sun goes down? Don't you hear me calling you, oh son of mine? Don't you hear me calling you now? I don't know where it all goes after the sun goes down. And so that was the story of the song. And for the basic structure of the song and the music, I took an old blues song sung by Leadbelly. Probably, he did record it, but it was probably many generations before him. And that song was called Bring Me a Little Water, Sylvie. Quite a famous song if you listen to it. And a lot of people do it in choirs, and they do hand claps and that sort of thing. And it really lends itself to that. And that song kind of goes like this. Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Bring me a little water now. Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while. Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie. Bring it in a bucket now. Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie. Every little once in a while. So a great old song about basically a field hand who's out there in the working in the hot sun, and he's looking for some water to be brought to him, and he's got to sing his heart out to kind of get it. So that's that was the one song. So here we are back in the studio. So the musicians are set up. So I'm singing along with the musicians to these songs, and we're working out the songs, and they're willing to do it. In fact, they insist on doing it as many times as they needed to get it right. And I really didn't have a whole lot of input into that part of it, I guess, because I didn't know really what they did or how to organize a band. I'd always been a solo performer anyway. So I was lucky. They took me in, and I don't know about the results at the end of it. I liked it. I have to say they brought a different level of musicianship to it. And to me, I always looked at these album recordings as that I've done as kind of an education, because I knew I was way behind, in learning about all of this, and I wanted to take these things as a learning opportunity, and they certainly did become that. Later on, I remember sitting down with a few session guys in Nashville when we were doing an album. I think might have been the album Old Souls. I'm not sure, but anyway, I sat down with them at lunch, and I said, look, I see this as kind of going to university. Like, you guys are the professors. I learned so much. I listened to you, and they thought that was kind of interesting, because they're working for a living. They're, for me, I don't have to make a living at this, which is one of the reasons why I didn't pursue it when I was young. And you can call me chicken if you like, but it's all worked out pretty well. So after this long session, and I remember that the studio was actually on the third floor, I think, of an old converted movie theater. And I don't know what it was called, the Rand or Rialto or something like that. Anyway, on O'Connor and Coxwell in Toronto. And in fact, around there was where John Candy at one time lived or grew up. And he used to hang around there. And it was kind of neat because it had old movie projectors around and so on. But it was on the third floor, and the bathrooms were on the main floor, the basement almost. So I'll tell you one thing, when you're going to sing for 8, 10 hours or whatever it is, you better bring a lot of water. So I drank and drank and drank like a whale. And of course, as a result, you've got to go to the bathroom quite a bit. So I had to run down these stairs all the way down and then run all the way back up. But in a way, it was a good break from the sessions. But you got to protect your voice, and it's like everything, when you do so much of it. So once this is all done and it's kind of in the can and you've got the taping done, then the next sessions will be where you do overdubs. So then guitar player came back, the other bass player and the drummer, they were long gone. They were going back on tour. And the guitar player, Russell, who actually he works for TC Electronics, and you might find some of his demo videos because he goes all around the world doing demos of their new pedals and such, and just a great guy, an amazing guitar player. Just off the topic, or perhaps it's on the topic, but I once asked him how he learned. He was originally from Scotland, and when he was a kid in Scotland, he said he had a guitar, and he'd listen to the radio. And he would just, on one string, just pick out the tunes on one string while listening to these songs on the radio and then later on records. And that was really how he learned to play. And again, just an amazing guitar player. So then we did these overdubs where he worked on some of his parts, and he spent so many hours. I mean, certainly he wasn't making any money on this, but he seemed to be really excited to be involved in an original project, original music and that sort of thing. And often a lot of the work they do is more like a job, where in this case it's a bit more of a labor of love. And I found that, for other people too, and I've got them involved in projects. People do love to get involved. Plus, we brought in then a piano player. Now, the piano player, who's a great fellow, and he piano, organ, and so on. He brought on all this stuff, and he played along to the tracks as they had been recorded, and added piano parts and organ parts, and he was just marvelous. And I remember he had charts that had all kinds of squiggles on them, and they were just numbers and so on. And turned out I went to lunch with him too. Thought it was really productive to buy one of these guys lunch and just pick their brain. And he talked to me about being in Nashville. He was there for 10 years. And he said, it's a tough town. And it is a tough town because, to get up to the A-listers where you work regularly, and you've got to make a lot of friends and really, really be good. And he was good, but he found, I think, the grind of it a bit much after a while. Came back to Toronto. Eventually went off playing on cruise ships, where he really found a pretty good lifestyle, I think. In any case, he kept talking about, he was using the Nashville number system, which I've lately been incorporating into my own work because it's a way to get other musicians on side, and maybe I'll talk one day in another video about it, but the Nashville number system turned out to be really interesting. So we did that, and then we didn't do it on the first album, but I think on the second album I did have, no, actually that's not true. I did have a backup singer. Now, this is another thing. When you get a backup singer, professional backup singers are so good. They can sing typically in 3 different octaves, and they'll stack their parts. They'll sing, here's you, at one level, one octave, and they'll do one octave below you, and one above you, and then one maybe right with you or something, then stack them together. And the sound they get is unbelievable. And I've had that experience later on where the backup singer is so much better a singer than I am. I mean, I'm not really a singer. I sing, let's face it, I love singing. But these backup singers still impressed so much. And so then she came in a separate session, and we did, the backup thing. So that's the next part that you have to do. Now, after all that is finished, then you start to do the vocals. Now, this time it's the real vocals, so you'll spend some time. And again, I was doing this kind of every Friday on my first album just to give myself some time, because I found I could do 3-4 hours at a time, and after that my voice just got tired and I couldn't give it all that I wanted. So, I typically work in sort of 4-hour increments on a Friday afternoon. And I got to tell you, when you go into the studio, it's the greatest experience in the world because everything is focused on you, especially if you like that kind of stuff. If you don't like it and you're too shy, okay, but everybody's there to support you, support the artist, and because they want the best product possible, and you've got to be relaxed and you've got to feel good. So they do everything they can to make you feel good and make you really enjoy what you're doing. And that to me is just, you can't feel better. I got to tell you, and anybody will tell you, the studio experience is just great. You got to do it once in your life if you never have. So you do the vocal sessions and you keep going at it. And I've always felt that every album, I never spent enough time on the vocals. I thought they could be better. I didn't want them to be improved through the mix or through auto-tune or this or that. I wanted to just keep going and doing it myself, until I felt better and could do it. But, you run into, it's not like the 60s or, where you could, where the big guys could walk into a studio and spend days and days or months just recording over and over again until they got it right, and and mix and match and do all that sort of stuff. I prefer to do it live off the floor and just get it right. But sometimes you got to do it. Every time I'd make a mistake or it wouldn't be as good as I thought, I'd want to go back from the beginning, but then they want to chop and cut, the engineers. But again, you gotta be realistic. When you're in a studio and you're paying for it, the time to do all that is on your own. Pre-production. Spend as much time as you want, because you don't charge yourself anything. You guys all charge by the hour. So you do the vocals. Then the part that I hadn't thought about was the mixing. Now, mixing is a pretty complicated process where they go through each instrument and sort of move the ranges, and the waves of sound so they don't interfere with each other. It's quite a complicated process, and each song could take 3-4 hours to do. It could take a long time, no less than an hour certainly, but sometimes quite a bit more. So you've got to allow some time for that. And again, that's usually the engineer is doing that. The producer doesn't really get involved too much in that basic mixing stage. And I always like to be there for the mixing. So, I'm not worried about all the technical things. I'm not a technical guy. I'm not an engineer. But what I like to do is think about, okay, the vocal needs to be more up front, or this instrument needs to be down a little bit more. Let's cut down that snare. It's a bit too clangy, and then, all of those sorts of things. So once you get that done, then you're pretty well ready to go. What happens is they download the tapes into a stereo mix, and then that mix is something that you send for mastering. And mastering is the last part, where usually that's a separate budget. So mastering can usually cost you about $100 a song, but you can usually get a package deal from somebody, and there's some good people around. And again, you want to be fair. You want somebody to make a dollar out of it, but you're always taking into consideration your budget. Once you have those masters, then they have they create the master tapes that you can send to the studio or the CD manufacturer. I used CD Baby in the first couple of times, and they'll manufacture the CDs and they use those directly. And these days that's pretty cheap, but then again, it's cheap because how many people are using CDs anymore? So I haven't even decided what I would do with my next one, if I even produce CDs. But you can upload everything to the internet, and CDs I think are still good for souvenir purposes. And I have gone through a time where I was able to sell a bunch, but often people want these souvenirs. You can autograph them and sell them then for whatever it is, $5-10. Even some people want to sell them for $20. So that depends if you're busking or playing a concert, those kinds of things. So, and that last part is the CD production. That's really up in the air because times have changed a bit as far as all of that goes. So, well, again, I'm Bob Menzies, and I want to encourage you to share this video and maybe send some comments my way if you like. But it's really been a pleasure sort of talking to you again about songwriting. And listen, I'll see you again. Please come back and see me for the next edition of the Songwriter Life. So, thanks very much. And again, I appreciate you listening. Please, share this video if you like it. But in any case, thanks for being here. Bye-bye.